to the Home Office, there has been a dramatic increase in the number of deaths from drugs in England and Wales, up by more than 40% over the 3 years to 2016.
Today, government is announcing a new strategy to help addicts recover from dependency.
We're still facing a problem where huge numbers of people are suffering harm from drug use because they're not accessing those services that they need. The majority of heroin deaths that we're seeing rising recently, those people have never been in contact with treatment. So if we don't remove the barrier of criminalisation and if we don't put more money into treatment services, we're not going to be able to get those people into contact with treatment services.
There are fresh calls today for music festivals to provide free drug testing services.
We would like to see drug safety testing facilities whereby people at nightclubs and at festivals can take any substances of concern, any illegal or legal substances in their possession, to a facility where they can get a test result so that they can make an informed decision about whether and how they're going to take that in order to minimise harm.
In 2010, we had 10 young people dying of drug illness or drug-related activity, and that was with ecstasy. And in 2015, we had 57. So we've seen this rapid growth in deaths related to ecstasy, which is the most prevalent drug at festivals and clubs. And what we're trying to do in a pragmatic way is awareness and education of these casual drug users to say actually they're not that safe, because in the 1990s MDMA, which is in ecstasy, would have been around 50 milligrams or 80 milligrams of MDMA. It's now about 125 milligrams on average.
Obviously, we're not saying take your drugs and try. What we're saying is you shouldn't be taking drugs in the first place. The reality is that many people take drugs, and we are trying to minimise the harm from those drugs.
A report here in Britain says that Instagram and Snapchat are the worst social media sites in terms of the impact that they have on the mental health of young people.
While social media does have a positive impact, there are some negative impacts, and that's particularly around cyberbullying and feelings of anxiety and also lack of sleep. There's often a compare and despair attitude amongst youngsters because they're kind of comparing their lives to the unattainable and unrealistic images that are perpetuated on social media. There's also like a fear of missing out, what's called FOMO. What we're calling for is, and what young people want, is kind of pop-up warnings to remind them that they've been on social media a long time. So we call on the social media companies to introduce that.
The Royal Society for Public Health wants smoking to be banned from parks, pubs, events, beaches, schools and universities, hoping it'll encourage smokers to switch to e-cigarettes.
If the ban was extended to outside pubs and bars, around 1 in 3 smokers said they would switch to e-cigarettes. 10 years ago, e-cigarettes weren't really around, but they are now, and there are much safer forms of nicotine. So for any of your viewers, if they're a smoker, the best thing they can do if they're struggling to quit is to move on to e-cigarettes.
Shirley Kramer is Chief Executive of the Royal Society for Public Health. We're about to have a reasonably frank conversation, well, even a very frank conversation about the HPV vaccination. It's important to emphasise that HPV doesn't just cause cervical cancer, but other cancers too, and they don't just affect women. So what are those other cancers?
So the other cancers are vulval, vaginal, penile cancers. 50% of those would be caused by the HPV virus, and also increasingly oral cancers.
Because of oral sex?
Because of oral sex, yes.
Right, and do you think this is widely understood?
I really don't think it's widely understood, and I think we really need to do more to make both parents and children actually aware of this.
I really don't want to worry any parent listening, particularly if they have teenage boys, but you obviously are of the belief that if you can vaccinate your teenage boy, then you should.
I do think it would be a good idea, but I'm very concerned about the inequalities, because if you have parents that are willing to pay, and there may be many parents who are willing to pay that.
400 quid is not a small amount of money.
It's not insignificant. But then what about the parents who can't afford to pay that, which is why vaccination programmes are so important to be a public good, if you like.
So we were bantering earlier on before the programme about the cost of the annual cost of the NHS of genital warts is, Shirley?
£52 million.
Yes. Happy holidays, everybody.
Outside of the number one public health issue of overeating and obesity, I wanted to scatter little observations all over this piece, so when someone comes and sees it, they can find something new every single time they look at it. From the bookies, where you can see these sort of, if you look really closely, you can actually look through the window and see people hitting the machines and looking pretty depressed. To the chicken shop, to the adverts of fast food, to the people within the pub. If you look closely, you can see through the door and look at people drinking. Barrage of observations and details for people to find out more about and enjoy. Maybe my piece will inspire some change, hopefully.
I mean, we've been there, haven't we? You're in a fast food restaurant, the cinema, or even the shops where you're offered something bigger, and research is suggesting that this technique of so-called upselling is fueling the obesity crisis in the UK.
At the beginning of my weight loss journey, I was almost 21 stone. And I used to go into fast food restaurants, etc. with friends, and they'd say things like, would you like to upgrade your milkshake to a large? And at the time I found it really hard to say no.
I think the individual does have a part to play, but we do live in what we call an obesogenic environment, and it's unfair.
Obesogenic?
Obesogenic, because it is contributing to the obesity crisis. It's not just down to the individual, but it's the environment we're living in. It's the marketing and the advertising that we're surrounded with and we're bombarded with.
Quite often after upselling, I was left feeling quite weak and guilty afterwards, which then spiraled with things like binge eating and that sort of thing, which just led to a spiral, really.